Over to you.
My pleasure. Thanks everybody for coming along. So this presentation today is about conducting, well, I've called it rigorous experiments, but conducting experiments. And it's something I sort of thought about that came from the organisational work, and I'll talk a bit about my background shortly. And I found it useful both in personal coaching conversations and in organisational change. And I've used this with multiple teams over the years in different ways. So hopefully you can think about how to apply it in your context as we go along. There's one breakout exercise that we'll do on the way through, and I'll do my best to keep an eye on the chat as we go along, but I've got two screens and sometimes I do miss stuff, so we'll see how we go. So my experimental mindset, it's developed more and more over the years. So my background is actually computer system engineering, computer science. I think anybody who's ever done computer programming, you type something into the code, you run it, and it might work or might get the outcome that you want, or it doesn't, or you get some debug error, and it almost always feels like it's a bit of an experiment, especially when you're finding bugs in the compiler. Your code is correct, but the compiler didn't handle it properly, and the outcome is still not what you expect. So don't let anybody tell you that computer programming always works the way you expect it. The more complex the system, the more likely you get a different outcome. Once I started work, I was in software engineering, business analysis, again, that sort of work. As I moved out of sort of coding and more into team leadership roles, and I would, that becomes more complex, more people-based, and people, when you're trying to change a team or improve the way a team is performing, you're always coming up with different ideas to try things. Sometimes at the technical level, sometimes the interpersonal level, sometimes at the whole organizational change level. And then now I'm more in executive and leadership coaching these days, so doing experiments there. And I joke about having two careers. One is Mr. Spock from Star Trek, and one is sort of Carl Jung, which is in the therapy space. So I've run a health and wellbeing practice for more than about 20 years. John mentioned, I've got experience in kinesiology, Chinese medicine, emotional freedom techniques, energy psychology, things like that. So all of those, you're attempting different things to see what changes. And I'm also managing a chronic health condition, and what works one day may not work the next. So you're always keeping awareness of what's working, what can I do more of, and how can that work? All right, but back to absolute basics with SF. So, SF 101, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Find what works, do more of it. And if something's not working, do something different. And I'm curious, and you could just throw this in the chat or call it out. Of those principles, which do you think benefit from an experimental mindset? Yeah, I mean, the first one, you're not actually trying to change anything. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the other two, finding what works and do more of it. Even if you've got something that works, to figure out how to do more of it, that takes a bit of experimentation. How do you do more of it? Maybe it's just literally just increasing the volume, but there might be other ways of doing more of it. And if something's not working, you've got to try something different, which is by definition an experiment. So I think 2 and 3 both benefit from that sort of a mindset, just that experimental mindset. And experimental mindset, I found, is really useful in that using that wording, that term experiment. In some corporate cultures, it's okay. They don't like trial and error anymore. Experiment sounds a little bit, more formal, if you like. Trial and error, no, as soon as you hear error, no, we can't try that in our environment. But experiment, okay, we're actually trying to achieve something. So that language itself is useful. So what I'm going to walk through probably for the next 15 minutes or so is the things that, from my point of view, make up good experiments. And I'm going to give you the exam questions, before we actually present the lecture, so that you can be thinking about these as we go along, coming into the breakout sessions. As I present each of the principles that make for a good experiment, I want you to think of SF questions related to that. Some are blindingly obvious and you'll pick them easily. Some of them take a bit more thought. So as I present each principle, think about what SF questions you might ask for that match that principle. All right, a hypothesis. For if you're just thinking about your own life, if I do this, I hope this will happen. We often try things. John and I were talking about doing exercise beforehand. It can be thought of an experiment. I think if I work out 3 days a week, I'll lose some weight and I'll have more energy. It might turn out 3 days a week, 4 days a week is too much, and you'll have to back it off to just maybe 2 days a week initially and then warm up from there. Or you start out at 5 days a week and find that you're actually more fatigued and you have to back it off a little bit. So we're always calibrating, always experimenting. Now, in an organisational context, you can state it a bit more formally as we believe that implementing, whatever the changes we're considering will yield these results. So you're always working from some hypothesis. And again, if hypothesis is too much of a jargon, here's what we're hoping for in terms of an outcome. But again, it depends on the culture of your organisation or the culture of the organisation working with, what sort of language you'll be using. All right, so starting with a hypothesis, first thing you're sort of looking for is benefits. What are we actually hoping to gain from the, what are we hoping will emerge from this experiment? And again, some of the SF questions will be very obvious in this context. But yeah, what are the benefits? And these overlap with a couple of other principles a bit later on, so keep this one in mind. Benefits are kind of more broader statements. We hope that by letting people work from home 1 day a week, that we'll retain more employees. I have actually heard that one. I've also heard something as simple as, look, if we move the team meeting from 8 till 8:30, more people will be able to attend because the kids have been dropped off at school. Something like that. Could be as simple as that. Or if we make Thursday mandatory be in the office day, we're hoping that the team will feel more connected because it's actually face-to-face. Something like that. So what are the actual benefits we're hoping to gain from the change? All right, that's that one. This one I find is often overlooked, probably of all the principles. Well, and one more. But how long are we going to run this before we decide if it's been a success or not? So when are we going to check in? So it might be, we're changing that meeting time from 8 to 8:30. We're going to run that for 2 weeks and then decide. A lot of people, you wouldn't go on a diet and then after 1 day go, oh, this is not working. The scale's the same as it was yesterday. And no one would do that. But it's amazing how many organisational changes expect something to happen overnight. So how long are you going to run this for before you evaluate the results? Are you going to evaluate something along the way? Are there going to be checkpoints that tell if you're heading in the right direction or not? But duration, it's an interesting one. And I'll be curious what SF questions you come up with around this. So leading indicators and lagging indicators. How will we know we're on the right track is the leading indicators. And again, there's some great SF questions in here, but leading indicators are not necessarily the outcome, but they're indicating that you're heading in the right direction. In football codes, I think in general, there's things like number of yards gained or how far down the field you've got. They're not necessarily how many goals are scored, which will be lagging indicators. That's what we want to have happen, numbers on the scoreboard. But what are the things that actually indicate the team is doing things right? So leading indicators, how will we know we're on the right track? Sometimes hard measurement, sometimes soft measurement. And again, you'll have plenty of easy SF questions here. Another way to think of this is, I don't know, whenever you've done a road trip, sometimes there's mile indicators, 110K to the next town, 90K to the next town, 70K to the next town. Those are indicators you're heading in the right direction, so leading indicators. And then the flip side, the lagging indicators. This is kind of the scorecard. How will we know it worked? And again, very obvious SF questions there, but some subtleties as well. But subjective, objective measures. Always I found in organisational change work, we want our team to be more motivated. Finding subjective measures can often be gained. So it's one of the hardest, trickiest bits of all change work, to actually find subjective measures that aren't gained. And I saw something on LinkedIn the other day about as soon as you publish some sort of measure like that, people start working towards that target, and they don't actually, some of the other behaviors that were useful fade away because they don't fit with the metrics. So you've got to be really careful shaping metrics in a way that gives you all the behaviors you want. It's probably one of the trickiest bits of all change. This one, again, this I love hearing what you come up with in terms of SF questions for this. Amplifiers and dampeners. How can we get more of what we want? We notice in probably in leading indicators and lagging indicators, some things are happening that are good signs. How can we make that happen more? How can we have more of that? And then sometimes stuff's happening that you're like, didn't want that one. How do we reduce that down? How we dampen it? So, and that, there probably aren't SF questions for not doing something. Our questions are usually about what can you do more of, but have a think about those dampeners as well. How can you reduce down something you don't want? And then how can you sort of amplify more of what you are seeing that's useful? So here's a summary of what we've talked about so far. Hypothesis, benefits, leading indicators, lagging indicators, duration, amplifiers. Don't have to necessarily happen in any order. Some of these will be familiar and some of these won't. And have a think, what SF questions relate to each of those principles? And here's a bonus question. Do you think anything's missing from that when you're shaping an experiment? Because I suggest there is. So if you can think what else might be useful in shaping an experiment. Now we're going to play a bit of Zoom chat bingo. So I hope somebody was taking notes in your groups and can type up what some of the questions you came up with. I'm curious. I don't recall if I did this last time, but and sorry, what we'll do with the Zoom chat bingo is we'll pick a principle, say hypothesis. Everybody can just cut and paste from whatever they took notes in and drop it into the chat. And then we'll have a bit of a look through those questions, and then we'll move on to the next principle. So somebody, hopefully from each group, can actually type up some of the questions that surfaced, and then we'll have a quick
Rod, I have one point, because we started our discussion before the hypothesis. Oh my goodness, I have difficulties to say this, because you mentioned before you showed your presentation the experimental mindset. And I experienced when I did experiments that this experimental mindset was very important. Yeah, that only my excitement was not good enough. Yeah, for example, when I do constellation work and I offer it and the person says, yes, I will do it. But in the end, it showed that, and in my group, there was something mentioned like restrictions of mainstream. So if someone, for example, wants to understand what's going on and not just see the result and enjoy the result, then, for example, it's difficult if you use an experiment with constellation work, because this is sometimes not to be understood. Yeah, and this is perhaps a little bit of missing point before you start the experiment.
Thank you.
Well, what is needed, and there was one suggestion from some person up, Bob, but Juha can add also something, please, to ask how confident this person is, for example, with this kind of experiment. Then perhaps you get more of this mindset or get an idea, because I got it at the end because this person said this was not useful because she tried to understand and this was not to understand. So
interesting.
Shortly, to use the scaling question, how confident are you at the moment with the experiment? 10 being the most confident and the one opposite, and then try to figure out what are the topics which makes he or she being confident, and then try to figure out what could give the more confidence, the n+1. Short like
and
that.
I guess what came to mind for me there was the basic sort of contracting platform question, if you like, which I was reminded of by Jenny Clark at the recent conference, which is, if in the course of our conversation we were to come up with some ideas of things to try, would you be willing to give that a go?
Mm.
And they go, oh, no, I'm just happy I'm here for a win session, whatever, you know. So, you know, you're not going to get any further with that. But other times it can be, oh, yeah, you know, if you've done the rest of it well, they're usually, oh, yeah, I'm up to trying something. And you might need to state that a bit more formally if you're dealing with an organisation. So, yeah, just I love it. Thank you. I'll see if I can add that into the presentation.
Perhaps
So
to
the
add the
appetite.
second point, and then we are done with our group. I think what I remember also, Juha, is what you said about the question, how important is this change for you? Because this is a question what I know from the International Coaching Federation, because the more important the change is, the more likely it is that this person will do something or is really open for something new in this experiment.
And that may come under the benefit side of things. Yeah. Did anybody come up with some additional hypothesis questions? I don't think previously I'd come up with things. You just sort of think, well, I like it. It's sort of the platform building, the contracting. Is there the appetite for change? So we can include all that under that hypothesis, I think, statement. So where do you think there's a need for change? And then what would you like to have different? That's a classic question, you know. I have actually built hypotheses using straight up platforming with SF, you know, building that platform and answers some of the next question as well. Some of the dream future person best hopes. Yep. Sorry, a question from Kurt there. Is it doing something differently or is it something you don't know the outcome? Probably both. You're going to try something, you're hoping the outcome is this, but in complex systems, you don't always know that what you're going to do is going to lead to the desired outcome. So doing small things and seeing how the system responds is the idea of an experiment in a complex system. You don't need to make a big change. You can just sort of nudge a bit that way or nudge a bit that way and see what happens. And I guess some of the conversations I've had around this in organisations about reducing risk, because you know we've all seen the huge organisational change program that's going to take 2 years. It's a huge amount of budget. That's very risky. So what if, I was talking to John during the break, what if we do something for maybe a month? We think the outcome will be this. We're looking for these indicators to show on the right track. We need a little bit of the budget, but you know, if it doesn't work, it's not a big thing. We've spent a little bit of money. That's a lot easier to negotiate than it is saying we need to do this 12-month organizational change program. So yeah, this running smaller experiments more often is actually less risky than running big things for longer periods. And that's also where the duration comes in. Oh, I like that one, Melanie. What have you tried before with experiments that will help you in any way? Because yeah, the more teams get used to doing this, it is building muscle. You know, all right, we did this last month. That didn't quite work, but we think we're going to try it again with a slightly different approach, things like that. Anyway, so we're getting back to some of our SF questions. So the hypothesis, and I love that, building the mindset, the contracting, the appetite for a change, willing to do something. Do they have the experimental mindset? What about benefits? There's a, you know, very easy SF question that goes with benefits here. So what SF question? What is the cost? It's a good question. You're talking dollars or could be other costs as well. But yeah,
No,
what about
yes, sorry, but I didn't mean actually the financial component of the change. I was thinking about all the other things. That is, what would be the change in people, emotions, and many other things. So it's not about finances.
Okay. Cool.
You have to sacrifice maybe something to do that.
Yes. But yeah, benefits. What question would you ask that will help you find out the benefits if this experiment had the outcome that you desired? Oh, I like that one. When you see what would make it meaningful to you, yeah. The very basic one, how might this make a difference? Or how are you hoping this will make a difference? Yep, who else will benefit? Nice. I like drawing that out a bit more. What difference would it make to you, others, to the dog? I did actually ask a question once. I was working with a client who was job hunting, and they lived by themselves. And I asked, what would your laptop notice would be different? What would, if you were motivated to continue searching for a job, what might your telephone mobile notice was different? So yes, all those perspectives are great. What is the elephant in the room, and how might you want the elephant to become or move? Yeah, when you're not trying to eat it. Yes. Yeah. If the experiment doesn't meet your expectations, how can you benefit? Oh, that'd be an interesting question. I hadn't thought of it before, but really interesting. All right, sorry, just conscious of time. What about leading indicators? You want to know you're on the right track. What SF questions had you thought of that might be useful for leading indicators? How would you notice is pretty much it. How would you notice you're on the right track? What would let you know that things are improved? Actually, this question changed my life. What would be the smallest thing I would notice that would let me know if things were improving in some way? And I don't know, about 25 years ago, I was in significant financial debt with numerous credit cards. And when I asked that question, what would be the smallest thing I might notice to let me know think I was making progress in some way? It was if I could make $1 more above a minimum payment on a credit card. And I thought, I can make $1 more on a minimum payment. And by doing that, gradually I paid down one card, then I could pay off the other cards, and then I could pay off the other cards. But that question was what got me on the road to recovery. What else have we got? First tiny signs that things are moving in the right direction. Yeah, just use the language. First signs telling you the benefits are about to happen. Oh, about to happen. I like that one. There's a bit of sense of anticipation in that. It's like Christmas morning. What questions did you come up for lagging indicators? Definition of done. Fantastic. Thanks, Klaus. That's exactly what it is. How would you know we're done? How would you know we're finished? It's sort of definition of done stuff. It's amazing how often you're working towards something, but you don't know when it's finished. So a definition of done is I've got this. Right. A shorthand version I use for myself is that I learned from being involved in fire walking events was job's not over until the cleanup's done. It might think, okay, we've done the fire walk, great, but then there's another 3 hours of cleanup. So job's not over until the cleanup's done. It's amazing how often that keeps me honest with stuff. Yeah. Future perfect is another one here. The change has already happened. So future perfect is useful. That gives you a kind of a list of, here's the things we think might have happened. If that change has already occurred, here's a list of things we're looking for, we might notice. Yep, how might success look like? How would we know this was working? All good questions. Yes, the future perfect being a direction, not an outcome. So initially you might sort of explore it as an outcome, but then always with that chance to revisit and calibrate, now are we heading in the right direction? But yeah, any ESF questions around duration? Oh, I love it. How would you know when it would be good to evaluate this experiment? That's a great one. When would be good in check and see? When would be a good time to check in about how this is going? Yep. They can be this simple of questions. It's amazing that, you're doing I don't know, 9 month change program, but nobody's asked these very basic questions. And, there's thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars of budget on the line, but no one's actually gone through this nitty gritty and actually mapped it all out. And you can do this in a couple of pages. So part of the change proposal can be, here's the questions, here's what we've explored so far. Here's the boundaries. Creativity happens in a set of boundaries. So asking these and defining these is sort of shaping things up. All right, amplifiers and dampeners. Anybody come up with some SF questions around that? A Melbourne SF practitioner has just published a book with a title that is a great way to identify amplifiers. And the title was, how did you do that? Something's working great. We're getting the outcome we want. How did you do that? So in investigating that, I will write it in. And how did you do that? Is useful at an individual level, but also at a team level. It's, we all have done postmortems and things when things gone bad and what went bad. Why did the server crash when we didn't want it to? Why did we blow the budget with that particular change? But we don't often look at how did we succeed? How did we make that work? It's usually just ignored and glossed over. And Paul Jackson does some great speaks about you can learn quite a lot from success too. Yes, sometimes it's luck or sometimes it's, but I think there's a missed opportunity if you don't examine it. You really need to investigate that success. How did we do that? It's a really interesting question. What else? Yeah. What did you draw upon to make that happen? What do you have to say no to in order to be fully say yes to that instead? Oh, nice. I have heard that one. How can we make sure we stay with the positive change? Oh, I like it. It's a nice open-ended question. What can you usefully let go of? Oh, I'll usefully let go of. That is such a great phrase. Letting go of ways of acting or being. What difference did it make? Yeah. Usefully let go of. I'm going to be thinking about that one for the next day or two, at least. That's a great question. All right. Did anybody come up with something we missed? So Christiane already mentioned there was stuff in sort of pre-hypothesis that could be in there. Anybody come up with any other principles that you think might have been missing from this model?
Yeah, what I'm missing a little bit is questions or talking about how you design an experiment, about the content of what you are going to do in the experiment. Because you can have some vague goal or hypothesis where you want to go, but there's different options in how you tackle it or what you do. And I'm not sure where in these principles I can find material to talk about that or discuss about that or facilitate the process of defining exactly what you're going to do inside the experiment.
Yeah, probably it's not something that's included because the environment will be very different wherever you're conducting an experiment.
Of course.
This is about kind of shaping it up. Here's the shape of our experiment. Here's the boundaries. Here's what we're looking for. And again, there's some classic SF questions there. Okay, what's our next what's a small action? What's our small next action that'll move us in the direction we want to go? What's the first thing we're going to try?
Yeah.
Will lead to some action steps.
It's probably as simple as that. I agree. Thanks.
Great question.
Maybe I would have a question, I think one could have a more basic look at experiments, and in order to find out what SF concepts are there for shaping an experiment. For example, how do you see that when we start to behave as if, as a strategy, an SF strategy? This is also a kind of experiment, but it's more one step, the desired future, and then behave as if. So, as you said, we don't know the outcome. We have to look at small things, tiny changements, and be aware about that.
Excellent. I love the thanks, Kurt. And in the chat, somebody mentioned with dampeners, what will we like instead? So yeah, you notice something that's not what you want. What do you want instead? And then how would you hope to manage these challenges along the way? Always a great that I think having involved in project management, a question like that is fantastic. You spoke about resources, of course. You already have to help. You already have that help you go in a good way. What's been useful before when we wanted to explore something at a large strategic level. Some of the big banks in Australia have actually spun off entire little organisations so that they could run experiments. They thought that was a way of managing the risk. All right. Sorry, conscious of time. So the one thing that from personal experience that I found both as an individual and as teams or organisations would be capacity. looking at where John and I were talking in the break, where most teams are trying to do too much at once. So how much capacity in your context is there available for change? I know you asked that with the team. Somebody asked a question like, how many change initiatives are going on with the team at the moment? Or just that question, what capacity does the team have for change at the moment? And I heard about one team that, not only had half the team be made redundant, they were now answering to a different manager, plus the team lead had just lost a close family member, and I don't know, there was a change in pay structure or something. So this team was already in a high state of flux. And then you're asking them to entertain another change? Give them a break. So this capacity, what capacity is available to change? And so some great questions popped up there from Yusuf. Would you include the willingness for change in this capacity? I probably would, actually. Yeah. Some of the parties being reluctant and wanted to change, and you could scale that and see what it is. You can do some group scaling. Yeah, change fatigue is real. Thank you. Another reorg? Yeah, we haven't finished the last one yet. So yeah, I find just factoring in that capacity. Any other SF questions you can think of in terms of capacity? So yep, scaling it for me is an obvious question. And we talked about at the start, how confident you feel that you could take on another change at the moment. Some people say, yep, I'm willing to take that on. And sorry, the other term I've used in organisations is bandwidth. How much bandwidth do you have available to try this at the moment? No, we've got a release due in 1 week. Forget it. We're not going to jeopardise that at the moment. Come back to us in a month. All right. Yep, we had, and I would like to ask, probably capacity is part of that contracting phase, that platform definition phase. I'd ask it pretty early on, because the rest of the conversation doesn't matter unless they've got the capacity to do that. All right, well, thank you very much, everyone, for participating in this session. I do have an annotated version of these slides, which I will share with John, so we can put it up with the video. Where I'll actually go through this chat and make sure I add any more questions from useful things that have popped up from that chat into those annotated slides, and then we'll share those as part of the article.